Hello.
Hello. Oh, have I got a story for you?
I can't wait because I messaged you and I was like, what is it?
I know,
You
I
didn't
actually
even respond.
I saw it this morning and I was like, oh, I didn't realise you'd replied going, what is it? And I was
Yeah,
like, oh
marks
well.
me right off. Yeah, I'm excited for your story.
Yeah.
I don't know why, but I
Hmm.
started thinking perhaps it's the story that I'm currently researching.
Do you know what? I always think that.
I think, well, if
Every
we're
time
gonna,
I do a story, I'm like, oh,
yeah, what if we're gonna show up and be like, boy, have I got a story for you? And you're like, me too, and we just tell the same.
do the same one. I guess
Yeah,
it,
but
it depends whoever goes first. It
yeah,
could be. It is quite, I think, a well-known story. I've heard it a
well,
couple of times.
judging by the title, it's not the one that I'm researching.
Okay.
But boy, is that a story.
Boy, is that a story.
Girl.
Girl, is that a story? Yeah, no, it's a good one.
Yeah, it's so difficult to lay out a story, isn't it?
Yeah, it
Start to
is.
finish.
Yeah.
It's actually very difficult to plan how you're gonna write it and how you're gonna tell it. But I think that's what I enjoy most actually.
Yeah. No, I like it once I've done it and I've got it set up and I think, yeah, I'm happy with that. Like the Travis Walton took me so long to do
Yeah.
because there were so many sort of different parts of it and I just really wanted to get it right because I really loved that story.
Right, should we crack on?
Yeah, why not?
Random blams then. Go.
My random blam is a statistic, and it is 1 in 25 adult drivers report having fallen asleep whilst driving. And many more admit to driving when they are severely sleep deprived. And I mean, I get that. I would definitely be one of those in the statistics because I do
Which
drive sleep
which one though?
deprived.
Falling asleep?
Do you know what? I think in the past, when I first passed my driving test, I think I probably did at one point because I've got a vague memory of having that moment where you sort of go, and I thought, oh God, I need to pull over.
Yeah.
Um, so I think I probably did when I was younger. Now I take the stance that like if I know that I'm tired, I'll pull over and go to sleep.
Yeah.
I
That's
always
what you
make
should do.
allowances. Yeah, I always make allowances for that. If I feel even slightly tired or I feel like my concentration's drifting, because I drive a lot for work. I drive normally minimum 5 hours in the day, 2.5 hours there, 2.5 hours back, and that's probably the least amount that I drive. But I mean, some days I can drive 9, 10 hours easily in a day. And I always make sure that I've got a sleeping bag in the back, pillows. And if I start to feel tired, I'm napsies, mate. I get back at
Do a
4 or 5 o'clock in the
sleep.
morning. Yeah, definitely.
Well, at least you make it back.
Your blam, milady?
My blam is much more light-hearted.
Good.
So I've just found out that if you tickle a rat, it will laugh audibly.
I kind of want to put that to the test.
I know, me too, but I got a rat.
Yeah, I want to put that to the test. I love a rat as well.
Yeah, I thought, let's have a fun fact. Also, I found out
Yes.
mosquito have teeth.
Do they?
Yeah. Why though? No idea. What do they nom on?
Yeah. I thought they had like a,
They've got a spout,
yeah, spout.
like a straw.
Proboscis. Yeah. Yeah, I thought they had a little needle tube.
Yeah, but they've also got teeth.
Oh, toothies.
Teethies.
Oh, well, there you
Yep.
go. You're welcome, everyone.
Yep. Random blams.
Done. Yeah, so this story today, it's got a lot of highs and it's got a lot of lows. Yeah, so prepare to be on an emotional roller coaster.
I don't think I'm emotionally stable enough.
Oh, it's
I've
too
been
late now.
watching, yeah, I've been watching 13 Reasons
Oh,
again. I don't know why. I've watched
yeah,
it before when it first came out, but I've started watching it again just for something to put on.
yeah.
Dude, it's hitting me so differently.
Oh, really? Well, maybe I
Really
should
differently.
rewatch it. We loved it.
Oh gosh. Yeah, it's fantastic, the first season especially, but it's
Mm,
hitting me so differently as a like, more of an adult, because obviously it came out quite a few years ago.
yeah,
Um, and now that I've got a child in high school, gosh, is it hitting differently?
yeah.
So sad.
It is. It is really super sad.
So if I'm blubbing at your story, it's not really because of the story. I've just got built up blub that I've not let out.
Built up blub. Yeah, hate that. All right, well, let the blub fest begin. Morning.
Morning.
Morning, everyone. This is a morning for my episode today.
Whoop whoop. I've got my
So,
biscuits. I've got my coffee. I'm ready.
not that you only do that on my episodes.
I've got
I must
every
add.
day.
Every time, every
Every
recording.
day.
Always. A new episode, a new biscuit.
A new packet of biscuits.
A new packet, yeah, a new whole packet. What is it today? Rich tea?
No, just plain digestives.
Again?
Always.
Oh, I love a rich tea though.
No, they're too plain.
I love a rich tea. I think they're just such a nice plain biscuit. But you have to have them with like a cup of tea, don't you?
Yeah.
Cup of tea, rich tea, packet of. I love a rich tea finger as well. Have you had the rich tea
Yeah.
fingers? They're like they're
Yeah.
thinner. Oh, it was so delicious. I'm gonna have
Yeah.
to get some.
Yeah.
Get to the shops. Anyway, let's get on with the episode. So today's episode is called The Crash, and it revolves around two people in particular. So let's begin. Let's crack on. So Whitney was a freshman at Taylor University in Upland, Indiana, and she was loving her time at college. And on April 26th, 2006, as Whitney was walking across campus, she saw a big poster that said, we want volunteers to help with setting up of the banquet to welcome the new school president. So Whitney thought, I'm all about that. Sign myself right up. So she did. And she was truly embracing the college life. She wanted to be a part of everything. She wanted to make new friends. And she particularly wanted to sort of get in with some of the older seniors at the college. She found the conversation better. She seemed to sort of fit in with them better. The summer break was approaching within the next few days, and she didn't want her college days to come to an end, even if it only be for several weeks. She just wasn't ready for it to be over. Whitney had so loved her time at college, and so far in her time, she had absolutely aced it. She made heaps of friends. She was absolutely smashing it with her grades too. So after she'd signed herself up the next day, April 27th, Whitney got up, had her normal college day, getting herself ready, and she headed off to the minivan to meet up with the other volunteers. When she got to the meeting spot, she saw the college minivan sitting there, and she saw 7 students that she didn't know and 1 staff member, and they were all standing there waiting. And she kind of thought, oh God, I'm late. So she sort of hurried over and made her apology and said, oh, sorry, I'm a bit late. The staff member was Monica Felver. And she said, right, we're all here, let's go. Whitney was super pleased that the other volunteers were all seniors, because she thought, this is great. This is going to be another group of college friends that I can sort of get in with. We can form a bond. So she got herself in the minibus. She was chatting to the other students. She was getting some good advice, sort of do's and don'ts of college life. And she immediately struck up a good friendship with a girl called Laura. This Laura was Laura Van Ryn, and she was 22 years old. And as I said, she was also a senior at the college. She was bubbly, she was friendly, she was also exactly like Whitney. She was blonde, she was beautiful, she was tall and slim. So Whitney and Laura looked very similar, and they were very similar in personality as well. And a few of the other volunteers on the bus actually asked if they were related. They were, are you two sisters, or is this your younger sister? And, and they were like, no, we've literally just met. And everyone was like, blimey, you're like,
A doppelganger.
Yeah, you're so alike. But their friendship was imminent. Whitney was loving it. She sort of felt that she'd found a new bestie. Laura felt the same. She was loving this sort of, like you say, doppelganger that was a lot like her. They seemed to have the same sort of interests, same sort of sense of humour. They got on really well. They chatted and laughed the whole way on the journey. It wasn't a long journey. It was only about 15 miles from the campus, but they were laughing and chatting all the way. They arrived at the event in Fort Wayne, and all of them bundled out of the minibus and into the venue. For the next few hours, they set up tables, decorations, got the place looking amazing. They laid out flowers on each of the tables, tablecloths, everything. And when it was all done and ready, they got back into the bus and headed back to campus. As I said, only about 15 miles away. When they were a couple of miles from the campus, the whole minivan filled with bright lights. They looked up and wondered what was happening. The lights got brighter and brighter and brighter. Unfortunately, this wasn't some sort of divine happening. It wasn't UFOs. These were the headlights of a huge semi-truck. The driver of the truck, Robert Spencer, had fallen asleep and was now heading straight for the minivan. Someone from the front of the minibus was heard shouting, "Oh my God, no!" The truck barreled across the lanes and smashed straight head-on into the college van. It hit with such impact that it peeled the entire side of the van completely off. It sent the van spinning violently across the grass embankment. The students were thrown out of the side of the van, and bodies were now laying scattered everywhere. From Highway 69, 911 calls were now flooding in. A couple called Jennifer and Tom were actually driving behind the semi-truck and pulled over when they saw the truck glide across the lanes and smash into the minivan. Of the 9 minivan occupants, 5 were now deceased. Jennifer and Tom were stumbling around to see if anyone had survived. And Jennifer says, "We wanted to be sure that we could help anybody that needed it." And that's when we noticed the blonde girl. She says, "I stood over her and kept saying, 'Baby, hang on.' I did for her what I would want someone to do for my child that was laying there." A rescue chopper was called to respond to the accident. Jay Curry, an emergency medical services professional for almost 15 years, described the horrific scene. He said, "It was definitely one of the worst accidents that I've ever been to. There was a massive amount of debris spread out across a fairly large area, and they had to shut down the whole interstate for us to land." In the early morning hours, Whitney Cerak's parents were woken to a ringing phone. It was the county coroner to inform them that sadly their daughter Whitney had been in an awful accident and was one of the people that had been pronounced dead at the scene. Also, around that same time, Laura's parents were called, but they were told that Laura had also been in a terrible accident and she was alive, but in critical condition. Brianna McCurd, an intensive care unit nurse, said that Laura was categorized as a level 1 trauma. With her traumatic brain injury, swelling is extremely dangerous, she said. The longer the brain swells, the more chance of brain death. Miraculously, ER doctors were able to stabilize Laura. They then transferred her to the intensive care unit, and Laura's family was notified of their daughter's status. While Laura's family raced to the hospital to be by their daughter's side, across town, the county coroner began his grim task. Coroner Mowry said, "We could start removing the victims. We went to the hospital where we assisted the families and friends and hospital staff in identifying the bodies. The Taylor staff had been provided with picture IDs and personal effects, and they took that information, their personal experience and knowledge, and worked with our staff in identifying these people. The deceased were Laurel Erb, Brad Larson, Elizabeth Smith, Whitney Cerak, and Monica Felver, who was the staff member." Back at the hospital, Laura's parents, Don and Susie, and her sister, Lisa, are told what to expect when they see Laura for the first time. They said, "Don't expect her to look like Laura. She's been through a difficult thing." When Don first saw Laura, he said he could only see part of her face. She had bandages around the tubes in her mouth. She had a tube in her head, some cuts and bruises, and they hadn't really cleaned her up from the accident yet. She was a mess. The Van Rins started a vigil with family and friends that lasted for 5 weeks. Don said the family took turns at the hospital so that someone was always by their daughter's side. Once Laura's condition was somewhat stable, her family had moved her to a hospital closer to home. This hospital specialised in brain injury, so it just made sense. They were now waiting for some sign that Laura was not brain damaged. Meanwhile, Whitney's family were preparing for Whitney's funeral, which had to be closed casket as the damage to her body was so horrific. Around 1,400 people attended Whitney's funeral, and after, Whitney's family could begin trying to heal from their massive loss. Back in Grand Rapids Hospital, Laura's family were told that it didn't look like Laura's brain injury was too bad, and it's possible that she could make a full recovery. They were elated. They were still unsure of how long it would take, but they would wait it out, however long it took, and they were just pleased that they would finally get their daughter back. Laura slowly began to make progress, and on Tuesday, May 16th, 20 days after the accident, Laura woke up. She opened her eyes and saw her family there looking right back at her. Over the coming days, Laura was able to move her legs a little bit. She was able to start moving her arms and her hands. The hospital staff began to do some physical therapy with her. But so I say more importantly, but importantly, they had to check and do some tests to see if her brain activity was, as it should be or as they hoped it would be. The physical therapist asked Laura to try and write something because this whole time she couldn't actually speak, really. And when she did try and speak, it was too exhausting for her, and it was difficult to understand. So the therapist handed Laura a pad and a pencil and asked her to write a word that she was familiar with, a word that she knew categorically how to spell. It wasn't anything confusing. They just needed to understand that, you know, her brain was working in the way that, you know, it was supposed to. So Laura very vaguely and slowly sort of nodded that she understood the task. And she did. She wrote a word, but it was completely impossible to read, totally illegible. They tried again the next day, same again. Whatever it was that she wrote was just completely illegible. They couldn't understand it. And Laura's family had the horrible thought that her brain injury was actually far worse than they had began to hope for. The physical therapist then said to Laura, let's just try and write your name. That's going to be the easiest thing. You're familiar with it. You've probably written it 1,000 times. Use that as our task. Try and write your name. And in a total miracle, she did. She spent ages carefully writing it out, and her family paced around the room, keeping their fingers crossed for this note to finally be the one that makes sense. Laura finished what she was writing and slumped back in her bed, looking completely drained. The therapist walked over to Laura's bedside, telling her, "Good job, Laura. I know that was exhausting for you, but that's great. That's great work." She'd done it. She'd written her name. And there on the notepad, in big shaky letters, was the word Whitney. You see, what happened when the first responders had attended the scene, they had found this young blonde girl clinging to life. She had her belongings all around her, and right next to her was her purse, sitting right next to her body, and in it was her driving license that said Laura Van Ryn. But this was, in fact, Whitney Cerak. And it was just a complete coincidence that Laura's purse had landed next to Whitney. And to continue the twist, next to the actual Laura, who they believed to be Whitney, was Whitney's purse with Whitney's ID in. It was just complete, I suppose, coincidence, I guess, that, you know, their purses had literally switched.
Yeah.
And Whitney had been immediately bandaged up all over her body because she was so badly hurt. The only way that she was identified was from the purse that was laying next to her.
They just went, yep, blonde hair.
Yeah. Yeah, they looked and they thought, this looks vaguely like her. Here's a purse right next to her. Laura, the real Laura, was actually quite far away from Whitney, but like I say, coincidentally, Whitney's purse ended up next to Laura.
How strange.
Very. So 4 days after the accident, Whitney's family had held the funeral service for their daughter. No one knew because Laura's casket had a closed casket, so they hadn't seen her. Stephanie Pepper, one of Laura's therapists, said that when she called her patient Laura, she would respond with a sort of very crackled whisper and just said, Whitney. The name Whitney, she said it was just like this piece of a puzzle that she didn't understand. Stephanie didn't know any of the other crash victims.
Yeah.
She just knew that this girl, Laura, had been in a car accident. So she had no idea it was in a completely different area. When she kept saying Whitney, she just sort of thought,
it chalked it up to the brain injury.
Yeah, and she just sort of thought, well, maybe this is just someone that Laura knows. Maybe she's asking about Whitney and how Whitney is or something. I don't know. But she said she didn't realise that this was the piece of the puzzle. This was the bit that was going to answer everyone's questions that they didn't know they had. When Don's sister-in-law, Ruth Ann, visited the hospital, she did not think that the woman before her was Laura. She pretty much knew straight away. She said, I don't care what anyone says, that does not look anything like Laura to me. Her dad said that he felt that her teeth looked different. It didn't look like Laura's teeth. He said it looked like her teeth had kind of shifted in her head slightly. But again, his daughter was in critical condition. She just in a horrendous car accident where 5 other people had died. So he sort of thought, I mean, maybe her teeth have shifted in her head. I don't know, but it just, I mean, I've seen pictures of both of them, and to be fair, although they do look different, when you look at their teeth look really similar anyway. So, I mean, if he noticed a slight change, you'd think, well, yeah. When the hospital realised what had happened, Whitney Cerak received another phone call at 2 a.m. and the caller introduced himself as the Grant County coroner and the chaplain. It was the same voice that had called her 5 weeks before. They said that, or he said that they had reason to believe that their daughter was alive. The caller
Can you
asked,
imagine at that point in time them going, actually, I think she's alive? You'd be like,
we've just had her
but
funeral.
She's buried.
Yeah.
Or cremated.
Yeah, we've just had her burial, her funeral. 1,400 people attended. We're in a state of unbelievable grief for their 18-year-old daughter, and you get a phone call at 2 o'clock in the morning that says, actually, we think she might be alive. He asked them to bring Whitney's dental records to the hospital so that they could verify the identity. And Colleen and, you know, and the whole family were just absolutely stunned.
Is that not some sort of procedure that, you know, if you've died at a scene, to make sure you are who you are before?
It wasn't then.
Oh, yeah.
Carly, who's Whitney's sister, was convinced that this was some kind of cruel prank, because she was just like, she can't be alive because we just buried her.
Yeah.
It's bizarre. She said, why would someone say that Whitney's, you know, possibly still alive when I knew for sure that there was no way that Whitney was in a hospital? She said that she told her mum, there is just no way that this is Whitney. When Jim confirmed the coroner's story, Colleen arranged to get her daughter's dental records, and she and Carly were on the road by 3 a.m. And she said the first part of the drive, we were actually pretty angry. But the closer we got to Grand Rapids, we started saying, do you know what? If the Van Rins, so Laura's family, if the Van Rins couldn't recognise their own daughter, what the hell are we going to see? And she said it was almost like the panic then started to hit, and they were in an absolute panic of like, what are we about to walk into? What are we going to see? If this girl is completely unrecognisable, like, I'm not sure I want to see it, but
Yeah,
we kind of have to, because they're saying that it could be Whitney. When the Ceraks got to the hospital, Whitney was, again, obviously still sitting in a hospital bed, but she was kind of sitting up with her arms outstretched, kind of desperately trying to call for her parents. And she hadn't seen them for over 5 weeks, and she'd been through this massive trauma, and her family and her parents were nowhere to be seen from her point of view.
I can't imagine, you know, being in a hospital where you've almost died and then being surrounded by strangers,
Yeah, she had
because
no
she
idea who
wouldn't
they
have
were.
known. Yeah, she wouldn't have known Laura's parents. Have been surrounded by strangers who are talking to her and trying to care for her, and
Yeah,
you've got
and
no way to communicate that
no,
that's not right.
that's not, yeah, it's not you. And yeah, and the fact that they kept continuously calling her Laura and,
Yeah.
you know, kissing her head and, you know, saying, "Oh, look, you know, your sister's here," and that. And she must have been sitting there thinking, "It's not
No.
me. It's not me.
Yeah.
I need my parents," you know. And
Yeah.
all the while, her family are grieving for her and having a funeral. It just boggles the mind. Um, Meanwhile, while all this hugging and kissing was going on with Whitney and her family, Laura's family had the horrible realization that their daughter was in fact deceased. And over the next few days, Laura's body that had been buried under the headstone that read Whitney Cerak was exhumed and moved to Laura's hometown for her funeral. 2 years after the accident that nearly killed her and temporarily switched her identity with her deceased classmate, Whitney Cerak has recovered completely. And in the epilogue of the book, Mistaken Identities, Whitney writes that she's not quite her old self. She said, "I think my personality is back for the most part, maybe not as funny as I was before, because before I was really funny." She said, "I view things in a different light now. Because of everything, I'm so, so different." The Cerak family says that if there are any changes in Whitney, they are very small. We look at Whitney and her smile is back. Whitney says that she has no memory of the accident and little of what happened in the hospital before her family arrived. She said, "I remember working the banquet before, and then we went out to get pizza. Then I remember standing by the car waiting to get in, but that's the last thing I remember." Which I'm really glad. I'm really
Mm.
glad that she doesn't remember the actual accident, because that must have been horrific.
Yeah.
Whitney goes on to say, "I love the Van Rins. I love them to death. They took great care of me, and they still look me in the eye and be like, 'Whitney, I love you.' They're amazing people, all of them." When Don was in the hospital in the first days after the accident, he received a call on his phone from a lawyer who said he was from a firm that specialized in truck and automobile accidents. Don said, "I was shocked. I mean, I didn't know exactly how to react, but ultimately I said, 'I hope you find something better to do with your day,' and hung up." Don says his family was not interested in filing a lawsuit then or now. "I just didn't see what that would gain for us. Over the years, I've learned that forgiveness and love is healthier than bitterness and revenge." The end.
Gosh. Goodness
I
me.
just, it's just incredible to
So when
me.
Whitney's family got to the hospital, did they recognize that that was Whitney?
Yeah, I think it's, I think by that point, Whitney was a little bit sort of further along, so she was actually able to kind of talk a little bit. Um, they they knew it was her pretty much straight away.
Mhm.
And I mean, one of the nurses said that she would call her Laura, and she didn't respond. And she said, you know, that she would do this sort of quiet whisper and sort of go, "Whitney, Whitney," but she had no idea.
Mhm.
But her family feel that obviously if they'd for any moment thought that this would have been possible, or it could have been possible, that they would have not only asked to see Whitney's body, you know, but also they would have gone to the hospital to see this survivor, and you know.
Yeah, you just assume that it's correct. You don't, go get a phone call and say, "Oh, your daughter's been in an accident with a school bus, and 5 other people have died." You don't go, "But are you sure it's her and it's not somebody else?"
Yeah, I mean, even if you did, because I mean, I've heard and I've read stories where people have continued to say that can't be true. That can't be. No, you're wrong. You're wrong. That can't be her. But I think
But that's more denial, though,
one,
normally than a
I guess,
genuine.
yeah, I guess. I mean, yeah, you wouldn't. I mean, now I would. Now I would think, wait a minute, are you sure? Because this has
Yeah.
happened before. But yeah, I just can't. I find it so perplexing that they would commit, or anyone would commit to, you know, saying that someone has died and someone's in intensive care, and that's who they are categorically. That is
Yeah,
that person.
just
That,
based on the
yeah, I mean, they said
person next to him.
there was debris everywhere. Like the minivan had been ripped to shreds, and like it spun. You know, everything was everywhere.
Yeah, well, if all the passengers had been flung out, then what are the chances of their belongings landing right next to them?
Yeah, it's just. I mean, it's mad. It's completely mad. When I read about that, I just thought, I just cannot believe that they would pronounce someone dead.
Without knowing who.
Yeah, without,
Yeah.
like, do you not take like blood, or do you not do a DNA if they can't be
Well,
physically identified? Would you not take their DNA and
well,
be like, this
that's
is
what
who
they
it
do.
is?
That's what they do when there's mass casualties, tsunamis or earthquakes, nine
Yeah,
11, that sort of thing. They don't just go, "Oh, like that looks like that the person that's missing. That must be
yeah,
them."
yeah, or just find a
Let's
random
inform the
purse.
entire family. Yeah.
Yeah. I just can't even begin to imagine how traumatizing that must have been for both families.
Yeah.
But imagine, you know, I mean, just awful for both. I can't say anything other than that.
I feel like it's going to be more awful for Laura's family, because the relief that she's survived, but actually
Mm,
she's in intensive care, and then that, oh my god, is she going to be brain dead, and having
mm.
to wait 5 weeks, and then all of a sudden realizing, oh my
She's
god, that's
actually,
not
she
her and
died.
she's
Yeah,
died,
yeah.
and not having that grieving process, and knowing that their daughter had been buried
Mm,
without them saying goodbye. I
yeah.
feel like that's so much worse than
I don't
getting bad
know.
news, your daughter's dead, and then all of a sudden, no, she's not actually, she's fine.
I don't know, because they both got the same information, but round the other way,
Yeah.
didn't they? So, you know,
Yeah, but the emotions, I think, surrounding both would be very different. I don't think that they would
mm,
process, even though they're the same information but reversed. I don't think the emotions would be the same.
but I mean, you know, for Whitney's family, um, you know, they got a phone call at, you know, early hours of the morning saying your 18-year-old daughter has been killed in a car accident.
Yeah,
That, I mean, so traumatic,
yeah,
you know. And then obviously then they had the good news that actually she wasn't,
yeah.
you know.
But
So
Laura's family had that. Laura's family did have that. They had that
yeah, no,
phone
that's what I'm
call to
saying.
say
But
that,
they had it the other way round, you
yeah.
know. And it's, I just, I don't know. I don't know if one would be
I just
worse
feel
than the
like,
other. I think it's just one kind of gets made better and the other one gets made worse. You know, they had the hope and joy at the beginning of having their daughter survive, and then were told that actually she died, whereas the other one had, you know, the news that their daughter had died, and then had the hope and joy that actually she wasn't. you know, she wasn't deceased. She was in hospital in critical care, you know.
Yeah.
I don't.
But I mean, I don't want to be in either situation, to be honest.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
But I mean, by all accounts, Whitney's doing great. She's in her 30s now, and she's married, and she's, you know, she does a lot of speeches, and you know, she's really sort of taking control of her life, and you know,
So what
doing
happened
really
to the
well.
truck driver?
He got arrested and he served, I think, about 4 years in prison. Yeah, which just, I know it's not something he meant to do, but he obviously was aware that he was driving tired.
It's negligence, isn't it?
It
I mean, I
is.
think that it depends in what state it is, because different states have different laws, but it's involuntary manslaughter that has happened, and because
Yeah.
he was grossly negligent in his driving. So
Yeah, you know if you're tired. I
yeah,
don't care what anyone says. You know if you're tired. I do it more than enough, and you know, it's just one of those things where I think, right, be conscious of how you feel. Yeah, I am actually really tired.
yeah,
There's lay-bys everywhere in the UK.
yeah. Well,
Pull over, take a nap.
yeah, we're going down to see Pink at the weekend, and that's in the Tottenham Stadium, and that's 2 hours away, sort of, and half of it's like in London.
Yeah.
And that finishes at 10 o'clock.
Hmm.
But then by the time you get out, that's 10:30. So do I want to be driving back at 10:30 at night?
Yeah.
Windy lanes as well that I've got to drive through.
Yeah, that
No, I don't.
makes a
I'm
big
going to be really
difference.
tired. So we've made the decision to spend out an extra 70 quid and stay in a hotel.
Great idea. Yeah, great
I don't want to
idea.
be driving tired.
No, and I do the same for work. If I know that the chances are it's a long drive, it's 4-5 hours each way, which I've got tomorrow, I know that by the time I finish work, it's going to be probably around 8-9 o'clock at night. Do I then want to spend, you know, 4.5-5 hours driving back? I'm very familiar with, you know, roadside hotels and things like that. I'm absolutely fine in just checking into any kind of travel lodge or Premier Inn or whatever. Like you say, spending 50, 60, 70 quid, having a good sleep, and then get up early the next morning, drive home.
Yeah.
So much safer. But yeah. So everyone, don't drive tired. Cool.
All right.
All
See you
right,
next
guys.
time.
See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.
Be sure to stay tuned after the end credits to hear a few words from Whitney herself. Thanks for listening.
If you have enjoyed listening to our episodes, make sure you rate us and leave us a review on whatever platform you are listening.
We absolutely love hearing from you guys. So you can also help support our show by donating to our Buy Me a Coffee link. We will make sure that you get a massive shout out and a big thank you in our next week's episode.
You can also follow us on social media at Perplexed Podcasts. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and if you want to see more videos and blooper reels, subscribe to our TikTok and YouTube channels.
You can also email us your stories at perplexedpodcasts@gmail.com.
And you can find all the relevant links in the episode descriptions. Thanks for listening. Bye.
Bye.
It's an unusual experience to have the privilege of introducing a person whose funeral you previously attended. It's my joy and privilege to introduce my dear friend, Whitney Cerak Wheeler, to you today. I'm Whitney. If
you ever lose track of me, I'm wearing red pants, so they're pretty easy to spot. I just want to say that I am so honored to be up here and speak to you guys. When I was a freshman and living on First East Olson, Dr. Habecker talked so much about his vision of 2016, and I had no idea what it really entailed. But being back and seeing it, I can't believe this is the same campus I went to 7 years ago, and I can't believe you have a Chick-fil-A.
Yeah.
And 10 years ago, majority of people in this room were 8 to 12 years old. So I don't expect that you were really following this story. So it's a crazy story. It's not your typical everyday, just in an accident story. It's like a story that could be on Dateline because it's weird. And it wasn't Dateline. So, it's not like your typical story. Dun-dun-dun. And so we went on this car trip, and it was great. We laughed the entire time. Like, my nerves quickly left because this group of upperclassmen and staff were amazing, and they made me feel like I had known them for forever. So we set up for the banquet up there in Fort Wayne, and then we went out to get pizza afterwards. We were getting paid double, so it didn't really matter how much time we took. Just kidding. So we are getting ready to get back in the car, and that's the last thing that I remember. But I can tell you what the rest of the world saw, what happened. Not from my memory, but I can tell you from Oprah and from Dateline, that a semi-truck had fallen, the driver had fallen asleep and had crossed the median and hit the van full of 9 people head on. And it was a really terrible accident. Bodies went everywhere, and some died immediately, and some survived and were okay. I was one of those people in critical condition, and they loaded me up on the helicopter and took me to the Fort Wayne Hospital. And I think Laura's purse was close to my body. And so, like, I fit the description. Laura and she was a blonde, like the same height as me. We had like a lot of the same features. And so they took me up to the hospital, but stick with me. They took me up to the hospital, but they thought that I was Laura. And I was in a coma, and I had a brain injury. Like, my breathing was they didn't think that I would make it very long. So they did everything they could. Back at mile marker 66, they had the students there, and the only description that fit Laura was my description. And so confusion happened from there. They called my family up in Michigan and told my family that I had not made it through the accident. And that's what they told Taylor also. And they called the Van Ryan family up in Michigan also. And they said, your daughter is in critical condition. She was in a really bad car accident. She's in a coma now, and had a severe brain injury, but come down. And so all the Van Ryans, they came and they spent every minute with me. Every minute. They never left my side. For 3 weeks, I was in this coma, and they stayed by my side for those 3 weeks. And then the 2 weeks after, you come out of your coma very slowly, not like in Sleepless in Seattle, if you guys know that movie, or any other. Is Sleepless in Seattle? No, it's not that movie. Sorry. That's bad. I quoted the wrong movie. While you were sleeping, that's the movie. Got it. My eyes were open and I was doing therapy, but I wasn't fully aware of everything. And I knew a lot of the same people that Laura knew because my sister was good friends with Laura's friends. So I knew a lot of the same people. But I cannot remember any of this. So my family up in Michigan had thought that I had passed away, and they had a funeral for me. And a lot of people actually wonder this, like, what will people say at your funeral about you? But the weird thing is that I already know that answer. And there's some really good things that people say about you. It's really sweet. And then there's some really not so great things, or maybe they just don't need to be public knowledge. Like on this very stage, my sister, Carly, she told my entire campus that I didn't shower enough, and that one of my pastors up in Michigan, he told everyone that came to the funeral that I wasn't very good at sports. So I learned all these things out. But I mean, how often do you expect the person to come back and like confront you about that? So, but it started coming up through things that they noticed, or through like physical traits that I wasn't their daughter, Laura. And eventually one day in speech therapy, they asked me to write my name, and I wrote Whitney. But the Van Ryans, they loved me like I was their daughter because they believed that I was their daughter. And even after I wrote Whitney and their world changed, they knew that I wasn't their daughter. They still treated me like I was their family. And even this morning, Lisa, who you guys were able to see on Monday, who is totally amazing, she said, I love you like your family still. And it's this date, almost 10 years ago, that brought me to know the Van Ryans. But after April 26th, those things had changed. The left side of my body was completely crushed, and I wasn't able to speak above a whisper because I had just had so many surgeries that it was really hard for me to talk normal because the Van Ryans and my family switched. So my family was by my side all the time until I recovered. Eventually, my family told me about the mix-up between Laura and I was so confused. I didn't understand what they were telling me. The best way I can describe it is being the first one to fall asleep at a sleepover, and so much has gone on at night that when you wake up in the morning, you're like, were we even at the same party? Because you were totally left out of everything, right? Well, that's how I felt, but this party was 5 weeks. Like I missed everything in those 5 weeks. But there was one thing that I did understand, that Laura and the 5 other students that I had been with, well, 4 other people, sorry, that I had been with, had passed away in the accident. And they were all amazing people. I lost it. I was like a wreck when I found that out. I feel like so sad for their families and just for their friends, for their loved ones. I felt guilty that I had been the only student to survive, as they had all lived beautiful lives and had already done amazing things for God. And here I was, the only student to survive and a freshman. Not only did I have the feeling of guilt, but I also had the feeling of anger, always being in the public eye and never wanting to be, just wanting to keep to myself, especially at that time. I felt jealous that while I laid in a hospital, like learning to do simple tasks all over again, because my slate was wiped clean. I had to learn to do everything all over again. The other people that were in the accident were already in paradise in their perfect bodies. Like having to find a new identity. I was trying to force who I was before to be the person that I was after the accident. After graduation, I went and I spent a few years with my sister in Kenya. She's a missionary there. And I went to work with the street kids. That day marked me. That's the day that, 5 weeks later, when I woke up, when I got out of this coma, that's the day that my life changed. Through good things and through tough things, like this accident, the mix-up, being on TV, going to Kenya with my sister, getting married to Matt, my high school best friend, and having 3 awesome kids who are doing a really good job today. Those are all parts of my life, and they are just pieces of me, but they are not my identity. Thank you for letting me come back.